Hey guys, tonight we're going to venture into the strange and wonderful borderlands of the human mind. We'll be exploring the lives of those rare individuals whose brilliance was matched, and sometimes completely eclipsed, by their spectacular, mind-boggling weirdness. We all have a stock photo in our heads when we hear the word genius. Maybe it's Albert Einstein with that halo of white hair, a playful glint in his eye. Maybe it's Isaac Newton, sitting thoughtfully under an apple tree, about to get beamed by the laws of gravity. They're the sanitized, respectable geniuses, the ones who fit neatly into our history books. But history, if you look closely, is absolutely littered with another kind of genius. The ones who didn't just think outside the box. They set the box on fire, danced around the flames, and then used the ashes to paint a masterpiece that no one would understand for another 500 years. These are the mavericks, the eccentrics, the walking, talking paradoxes, whose brains seem to be running on a completely different operating system from the rest of humanity. Their story is one of breathtaking breakthroughs, world-altering ideas and habits so bizarre, they make your weird uncle who collects bottle caps seem like the most normal person on earth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us on these late night journeys. Now, dim the lights, find that perfect spot on your pillow, and let's ease into tonight's expedition together. We begin our countdown of the 10 most bizarre geniuses in history, starting with a man you think you know but whose true strangeness is a masterpiece all on its own. We begin our countdown at number 10 with a name so synonymous with genius that it's become a cliché, a name that conjures images of ethereal smiles, divine suppers, and sketches of the perfect human form, Leonardo da Vinci. But if you think you know Leonardo, you probably only know the highlight reel. The real man, the one who lived and breathed behind the canvas, was infinitely stranger, more obsessive, and more wonderfully peculiar than any of his paintings could ever suggest. To truly understand him, we have to forget the museums and the art history classes. Instead, let's travel back in time to late 15th century Florence. Picture the scene. The city is a labyrinth of cobblestone streets, wrapped in the deep, velvety silence of a moonless night. The workshops of the great masters are dark. The merchants are asleep in their beds. The whole world, it seems, has surrendered to the rhythm of dusk and dawn. But in one small room, a single candle flickers, casting long dancing shadows on walls covered in sketches of impossible machines and dissected human limbs. And there, hunched over a cluttered wooden desk, is Leonardo. He is not painting. He is not sculpting. He is writing, furiously. But something is wrong. His left hand moves across the page with a speed that is almost unsettling, the quill scratching out words in a script that no one else can read. He's writing backwards. This wasn't a one-time party trick. It was his default setting. The vast majority of Leonardo's thousands upon thousands of notebook pages are written in this mirror script. To decipher his thoughts on everything from the turbulence of water to the anatomy of a woodpecker's tongue, you have to hold his notes up to a mirror. For centuries, historians have debated why. Was it a form of primitive encryption, a way to protect his revolutionary and often heretical ideas from the prying eyes of the church or rival inventors? In an age of intellectual property theft and accusations of blasphemy, turning your private thoughts into a cryptographic puzzle was just good sense. Or was it something simpler, a practical choice for a left-handed man trying to avoid smudging wet ink as his hand moved across the page? The truth is probably a cocktail of both, but the effect is what matters. It turned his mind into a locked room. His notebooks, which should have been his greatest gift to the world, became his most private sanctuary. They were a sprawling, chaotic, encrypted server of human knowledge, and only he held the password. Imagine being his apprentice, a young boy eager to learn from the great master, only to find that his every note, every brilliant insight, every shopping list was written in a language that looked like alien hieroglyphics. It's a level of secrecy that borders on paranoia, the act of a man who felt so intellectually isolated from the world around him that he decided to literally write in his own private language. But the backwards writing was just the beginning of his eccentricities. His relationship with time itself was profoundly strange. Leonardo was a fierce enemy of sleep. He considered it a colossal waste of his precious few hours on Earth, a nightly death that stole moments he could be using to solve the mysteries of the universe. So, he devised a solution, a brutal regimen that today we might call polyphasic sleep. Instead of sleeping for one long, 8-hour block like a normal human being, Leonardo allegedly took a series of 20-minute naps every 4 hours. It was a form of self-inflicted, systematic sleep deprivation, biohacking, 15th century style. If this is true, it means he was operating in a state of near constant twilight consciousness. He would work for hours, his mind firing on all cylinders, then collapse for a brief, feverish nap, only to jolt awake again, ready to dive back into the fray. This schedule would have given him an extra 6 hours of waking time every single day. Over a lifetime, that's decades of extra work, extra thought, extra discovery. But at what cost? Imagine the toll it would take on your body, on your sanity. His mind, already a whirlwind of disconnected ideas, would have been supercharged by this relentless cycle of work and rest. There was no off switch. His brain was a machine that was never allowed to cool down. And you can see this frantic energy reflected in his famous notebooks. They are not orderly. They are not linear. They are a beautiful, glorious mess. A detailed anatomical drawing of a human heart will sit right next to a sketch for a giant crossbow. A treatise on the physics of light will be interrupted by a doodle of a grotesque face. A recipe for paint pigment shares a page with the design for a flying machine. It's the visual representation of a mind that refused to stay in one lane, a mind that was pathologically, insatiably curious about everything. His to-do lists from the period are legendary. One of them famously includes the items: describe the tongue of the woodpecker and measure the corpse of a giant. This wasn't a man who was thinking about what to paint next. This was a man who wanted to download the entire universe into his brain, and he was furious that sleep, social conventions, and the slow pace of normal life kept getting in his way. He was a man at war with his own limitations, a man who saw every sunset not as a promise of rest, but as a challenge to work faster, think harder, and unlock one more secret before the darkness fell completely. So, when we look at Leonardo da Vinci, we have to look past the serene face of the Mona Lisa and see the man behind it. A paranoid, sleep-deprived, left-handed mirror writer who was trying to reverse engineer reality itself. His strangeness wasn't a side effect of his genius. It was the engine that powered it. It was this absolute refusal to live, think, or even write like anyone else that allowed him to see the world in a way no one had before. He wasn't just painting pictures. He was dissecting the very fabric of existence, one bizarre, backwards written sentence at a time. And the true marvel is what this chaotic, restless, and deeply weird mind was able to produce. It's easy to get lost in the eccentricities, to see Leonardo as a collection of amusing quirks, the man who wrote backwards, and never slept. But to do that is to miss the entire point. His bizarre habits were not random tics. They were the very tools he used to carve out his genius. They were the methods of a man who understood, on a profound level, that to see the world differently, you first had to live in it differently. His entire life was a grand experiment in perception. Let's reconsider that mirror script. While it served as a practical shield against ink smudges and prying eyes, it also performed a deeper function. By forcing himself to write in a non-standard way, he was constantly engaging a different part of his brain. It was a daily exercise in cognitive dissonance, a way to keep his mind flexible and trained to see things from unconventional angles. To write backwards is to think backwards, to deconstruct the very act of communication. This habit of inverting the simple and the everyday is the key to understanding his work. He didn't just see a bird, he saw a complex miracle of aerodynamics and anatomy, a living machine he could take apart in his mind. He didn't just see a river, he saw a chaotic system of vortices and fluid dynamics, a puzzle of motion he could translate into mathematical principles. And that brutal sleep schedule, it wasn't just a quest for more time, it was a rejection of the natural binary rhythm of life. Wakefulness and sleep, light and dark. By breaking his day into small, frantic bursts of activity, he lived in a state of perpetual dawn. His mind was never fully at rest, but it was also never fully committed to the mundane reality of a single, long day. This allowed him to leapfrog between disciplines with a mental agility that seems almost superhuman. One moment, he was an artist, contemplating the subtle play of light on a fold of drapery. The next, after a 20-minute nap, he was an engineer, designing canal locks and military fortifications. Then another nap, and he was an anatomist, peeling back the layers of a human eyeball to understand the mechanics of sight. For Leonardo, there were no boundaries between art and science, between the beautiful and the functional. To him, they were all just different languages for describing the same underlying truth, the same divine mechanics of creation. And his notebooks are the ultimate proof. These weren't just personal diaries. They were the laboratory of his soul. In their thousands of pages, you can witness the birth of the modern scientific method. He wasn't content to accept the wisdom of the ancients. He had to see it for himself. He needed to test, to measure, to observe. This led him to do things that would have horrified his contemporaries. He illegally dissected more than 30 human corpses, men, women, and even a fetus, at a time when tampering with the dead was a mortal sin punishable by the most gruesome of means. But for Leonardo, the risk was worth it. He peeled back skin, muscle, and bone, not with the morbid curiosity of a ghoul, but with the reverent awe of a true scientist. The anatomical drawings that resulted from these secret candle-lit dissections were not just medically accurate, they were works of breathtaking art. He drew the heart and vascular system with such precision that his understanding of blood flow wouldn't be matched for another 100 years. He drew the intricate muscles of the hand, the delicate bones of the foot, the complex layering of the womb, all with a level of detail that was simply unprecedented. He was mapping the interior of the human body, a world as unknown in his time as the surface of the moon. And as he mapped the human body, he was simultaneously trying to give it wings. His obsession with flight is legendary. He spent years observing birds, filling pages with sketches of their wing structures, their takeoff patterns, their soaring techniques. He understood that flight was not magic, it was physics. From these observations, he designed a whole squadron of flying machines. There was the ornithopter, a device that was meant to flap its wings like a giant bat. There was a rudimentary helicopter, powered by an aerial screw. And there was a perfectly designed parachute, centuries before one would be successfully deployed. None of them ever flew. Of course, the materials and power sources of his era were simply not up to the task, but that doesn't matter. The genius wasn't in the success of the machines, but in the audacity of the thought itself, the belief that humans, these fragile earthbound creatures, could one day conquer the sky. He applied the same visionary thinking to warfare. The same hand that sketched the serene virgin of the rocks also designed weapons of terrifying efficiency. He drew an armored car, a precursor to the modern tank, bristling with cannons and powered by an internal hand crank. He designed a giant crossbow so large it had to be wheeled onto the battlefield. He invented a multi-barreled organ gun, an early machine gun designed to mow down infantry. He was a pacifist who designed the most advanced killing machines of his age, a paradox that haunted him. He understood that the same ingenuity that could create beauty could also create destruction. This is the ultimate strangeness of Leonardo da Vinci. He was not one man. He was a multitude. He was an artist whose scientific eye made his paintings uncannily real, and a scientist whose artistic hand made his diagrams beautiful. He was a vegetarian who worked for the most ruthless warlords of Italy, a man who dreamed of flight and plumbed the depths of the human body. He was a man so far ahead of his time that his genius was almost wasted on it. He left behind few finished paintings. Many of his projects were abandoned, and his scientific notebooks went unpublished, their secrets locked away in mirror script for centuries. But he left something more important, a new model for what the human mind was capable of. Leonardo da Vinci proves that the most brilliant minds are not always the most orderly. Sometimes they are a chaotic, restless, insomniac storm of pure, unadulterated curiosity. Our journey into the minds of history's most bizarre geniuses now takes us from the candlelit workshops of Renaissance Florence to the sweltering, dusty streets of early 20th century India. At number 9, we meet a man whose story is so improbable, so utterly strange, it feels less like history and more like a myth or a fairy tale. His name is Srinivasa Ramanujan, and he was a mathematician who didn't discover theorems. He received them fully formed, like divine transmissions from another dimension. His life challenges our most fundamental ideas about where knowledge comes from. Is it the product of painstaking, logical deduction, or can it sometimes arrive in a flash of pure, unexplainable intuition, a gift from the gods? Picture this. It's the early 1900s in Kumbakonam, a small temple town in southern India. The air is thick with the scent of incense and jasmine. The streets are a vibrant chaos of ox carts, pilgrims, and stray dogs. In this world, steeped in ancient tradition and deep-seated faith, a young man named Ramanujan lives in near poverty. He is a clerk, working a menial job for a meager salary, barely enough to support himself and his young wife. He has almost no formal training in higher mathematics. He failed his college exams because he couldn't be bothered to study any subject that wasn't numbers. To his family, he's a bit of a disappointment. To his colleagues, he's just a quiet, unassuming man who spends every spare moment scribbling furiously in a worn, cloth-bound notebook. But what he's scribbling is anything but ordinary. He isn't solving problems from a textbook. He's channeling something. The pages of his notebooks are filling up with lines upon lines of the most breathtakingly complex and original mathematical formulas the world has ever seen. There are theorems about infinite series, modular functions, and the properties of prime numbers so advanced that most professional mathematicians of the era wouldn't have even known where to begin with them. But here's the truly bizarre part. There are no proofs, none, just the results, page after page of incredible conclusions, standing alone, without a single line of logical argument to support them. It was as if he was a mountain climber who could teleport directly to the summit without ever having to make the climb. When his friends and colleagues asked him how he did it, how a poor clerk with no university education could possibly be generating these otherworldly formulas, his answer was simple, and to a Western mind, completely baffling. He said they came to him in his dreams. He claimed that his family's goddess, Namagiri Thayar, would appear before him and write the equations on his tongue. Sometimes, he said, he would see a scroll unfurl in his mind's eye as he slept, filled with intricate equations, and he would rush to write them down the moment he woke up, terrified they might vanish from his memory. He wasn't doing mathematics, in his view. He was simply taking dictation from the divine. Imagine the scene. A young man living in a small, mud-floored house, sleeping on a simple mat on the ground. He drifts off to the sounds of the temple bells and the chirping of crickets, and in his dreams, the veil between our world and another one is lifted. A Hindu goddess, adorned in silk and jewels, appears in the darkness and whispers the secrets of the universe to him, not in words, but in the pure crystalline language of numbers. He wakes in a cold sweat, his mind buzzing with the leftover electricity of the vision, and scrambles for his notebook and a piece of charcoal. The formulas spill out of him, a torrent of cosmic truth that he himself doesn't fully understand, but which he knows, with absolute certainty, is true. He once famously said, "An equation for me has no meaning unless it expresses a thought of God." This wasn't a metaphor. He meant it literally. For Ramanujan, mathematics wasn't a cold, rational discipline. It was a spiritual practice, a form of prayer. Each theorem was a glimpse into the mind of the Creator. His notebooks were not academic works. They were sacred texts, a record of his conversations with the goddess of his household shrine. He was a mystic who happened to speak in the language of numbers. This complete fusion of the spiritual and the mathematical is what makes him so utterly unique, so profoundly strange. He existed in a space that most of us can't even conceive of, a world where the line between a religious vision and a mathematical breakthrough was not just blurred, but completely non-existent. He lived in this state of divine inspiration for years, isolated from the global mathematical community, filling 3 notebooks with thousands of these unproven, God-given results. He knew he was onto something extraordinary, but he was trapped. Who would believe him? Who could possibly understand what he was doing? He was a prophet, speaking a language no one around him understood. He needed to find his people. So, with the encouragement of his friends, he began to write letters. He sent his work to several prominent mathematicians in England, the heart of the mathematical world at the time. Most of them dismissed his letters out of hand. The formulas were too strange, too wild, and they came from an unknown Indian clerk with no credentials. They were probably the ravings of a crank. The letters and the cosmic secrets they contained were likely tossed into the wastebasket. But one letter, written in broken English on cheap, creased paper, landed on the desk of a man who was capable of recognizing a miracle when he saw one. And that letter would change the course of modern mathematics forever. The letter from the unknown Indian clerk arrived at Trinity College, Cambridge, in January of 1913. It was addressed to G.H. Hardy, one of the most brilliant and rigorously logical mathematicians in the world. Hardy was the polar opposite of Ramanujan. He was an avowed atheist who believed that mathematics was a purely intellectual pursuit, a beautiful but cold art form governed by the unyielding laws of proof and logic. To Hardy, The idea of divine inspiration was not just silly, it was offensive to the very spirit of his discipline. He was a man who lived by a simple creed: if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. So, you can imagine his initial reaction to Ramanujan's letter. It was a rambling, 10-page document filled with dozens of bizarre-looking formulas, with no hint of proof or explanation. Hardy glanced at it, and like the others, was tempted to dismiss it. It looked like the work of a madman, but something made him pause. Some of the formulas looked vaguely familiar, like distorted versions of theorems he already knew. Others were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were so strange, so fantastical, they simply had to be true, because, as he later wrote, no one would have the imagination to invent them. That evening, Hardy sat down with his collaborator, J. Littlewood, to examine the letter more closely. For 3 hours, they worked through the formulas, their initial skepticism slowly melting away into a state of pure, unadulterated shock. They were looking at the work of a genius of a caliber they had never encountered. It wasn't just brilliant, it was magical. Hardy would later compare Ramanujan to Euler and Jacobi, the titans of mathematical history. He said it was the most remarkable letter he had ever received in his life. He knew with absolute certainty that he had discovered a diamond in the rough, a mind of staggering, raw power. He immediately arranged to bring Ramanujan to England. It was a culture shock of epic proportions. Ramanujan, a devout Brahmin who had never left his small town, was suddenly thrust into the cold, gray, and deeply foreign world of Cambridge University. He struggled with the food, the weather, and the rigid social conventions. He was a vegetarian who found it nearly impossible to find food he could eat. A man used to the heat of the Indian sun, who was now perpetually shivering, a mystic in the temple of pure reason. It was a collaboration between two men from different planets. Hardy tried to teach Ramanujan the concept of a formal proof, the bedrock of Western mathematics. Ramanujan, in turn, tried to explain that proofs were unnecessary when you could see the truth directly. Their conversations must have been extraordinary. Hardy would present a logical, step-by-step argument, and Ramanujan would listen patiently before jumping ahead 10 steps, pulling another incredible formula out of thin air, seemingly from his intuition alone. Hardy was playing chess, while Ramanujan was channeling the cosmos. The challenge for Hardy was immense. How do you teach the rules of the game to someone who seems to have a direct line to the person who invented it? Despite these profound differences, their collaboration was one of the most fruitful in the history of mathematics. Together, they produced a series of groundbreaking papers on number theory that revolutionized the field. Ramanujan's dream-inspired formulas, once polished and proven with Hardy's logical rigor, turned out to have deep and unexpected connections to other areas of science. They are now used in fields as diverse as particle physics, computer science, and even the study of black holes. The formulas that his goddess wrote on his tongue are now helping us to understand the fundamental structure of the universe. But the story does not have a happy ending. The cold, damp English climate, combined with his strict vegetarian diet, took a devastating toll on Ramanujan's health. He contracted tuberculosis and, after several years of illness, was forced to return to India. He died in 1920 at the tragically young age of 32. He left behind his 3 original notebooks and a sheaf of unpublished papers, which mathematicians have come to call Ramanujan's lost notebook. For the past century, mathematicians have been diligently working through these notebooks, proving his theorems and uncovering the treasures hidden within. Even now, 100 years after his death, his work continues to generate new fields of mathematical research. Srinivasa Ramanujan remains an enigma. Was he a conduit for divine knowledge, or was his brain simply wired in a way that allowed him to access a level of intuition that is beyond our comprehension? We will never know, but his life is a stunning testament to the idea that genius doesn't always follow the rules. It can blossom in the most unlikely of places, in the mind of a poor clerk who dreamed of numbers and conversed with gods. He reminds us that the universe is far stranger and far more beautiful than our logical minds can always account for. From the mystic who received his genius in dreams, we now travel to a man whose entire life was a frantic, caffeine-fueled mathematical equation in motion. At number 8, we have Paul Erdős, a man who had no home, no job, and almost no possessions, but who was, without a doubt, the most prolific and connected mathematician of the 20th century. If Ramanujan was a solitary prophet on a mountaintop, Erdős was a wandering apostle, a nomadic genius who believed that mathematics was not a solitary pursuit, but a grand, collaborative party. And he was the life of that party. His story isn't about a single blinding flash of insight. It's about a lifetime spent in a state of perpetual collaborative motion. Paul Erdős was born in Budapest, Hungary, in 1913, to a family of Jewish mathematicians. He was a child prodigy of almost unbelievable talent. By the age of 3, he could multiply 3-digit numbers in his head for fun. By 4, he had independently discovered the concept of negative numbers. He was a boy who didn't just learn mathematics, he breathed it. But from a very early age, it was clear that his brain was wired differently. He had his own private language for the world. A child was an epsilon. A woman was a boss. A man was a slave. To die was to leave. To give a lecture was to preach. And God was the supreme fascist, a malevolent being who hid Erdős' socks and stole his glasses, and who kept the most elegant mathematical proofs hidden away in a secret book. Erdős' greatest ambition in life was to get a glimpse into the book. This quirky, personalized view of the world would define his entire existence. After fleeing the rising tide of fascism in Europe, Erdős began a life that was utterly unique. He decided, quite deliberately, to shed all the normal trappings of adult life. He never married. He never had children. He never owned a house or a car. For the last 50 years of his life, he was effectively homeless. He lived out of 2 battered suitcases, filled with a few clothes and a mountain of mathematical papers. He had no fixed address, no salary, no formal position at any university. He was a mathematical Ronin, a wandering scholar who roamed the globe, staying with fellow mathematicians, collaborating furiously, and then moving on to the next city, the next problem, the next mind. His method was simple and legendary. He would appear, often unannounced, on the doorstep of a colleague anywhere in the world, from Memphis to Melbourne, and declare, in his thick Hungarian accent, "My brain is open." This was the signal. It meant that for the next few days, or sometimes weeks, that colleague's house was no longer a home. It was a high-intensity mathematical boot camp. Erdős would wake at dawn, fueled by a constant stream of espresso and amphetamines, which he took to keep his mind sharp, and immediately launch into a marathon of problem-solving. He would work for 19 hours a day, stopping only for a quick meal, his mind a relentless churning engine of theorems and conjectures. His host was not just a host. They were his collaborator. They would work side by side, scribbling on napkins, blackboards, or any available surface, wrestling with some of the most difficult problems in number theory, combinatorics, and graph theory. The energy was electric, obsessive, and utterly exhausting for everyone except Erdos himself. He was a force of nature, a mathematical hurricane that would sweep into a town, rearrange the landscape of a particular problem, and then depart as suddenly as he arrived, leaving behind a completed paper and a completely drained collaborator. Then he'd be off to the airport, on his way to the next open brain. This bizarre, nomadic lifestyle wasn't just a personal quirk. It was the key to his unprecedented productivity. By refusing to be tied down by a job, a home, or even a family, he maximized his time for the only thing he truly cared about: mathematics. He turned the entire global community of mathematicians into his personal, distributed research institute. He was the ultimate collaborator, the central node in a vast, interconnected network of minds. He published around 1,500 papers in his lifetime, a staggering number that is orders of magnitude higher than that of most brilliant mathematicians. And he did it with over 500 different co-authors. His influence was so profound that his colleagues invented a playful way to measure their connection to him: the Erdos number. If you co-authored a paper directly with Erdos, your Erdos number is 1. If you co-authored a paper with someone whose Erdos number is 1, your number is 2, and so on. It became a badge of honor in the mathematical community, a kind of intellectual pedigree. To have a low Erdos number meant you were close to the vibrant, chaotic center of the mathematical universe. Even today, mathematicians will proudly state their Erdos number at conferences. It's a testament to the fact that he wasn't just a great mathematician, he was a social phenomenon, a human superconnector who single-handedly transformed his field from a collection of isolated individuals into a thriving collaborative ecosystem. He was also a man of immense generosity. He had little use for money himself. He once said, "Property is a nuisance," so he gave most of it away. He offered cash prizes for the solution to problems he couldn't solve himself, ranging from a few dollars for a simple one to thousands for a particularly thorny conjecture. He would help struggling students, donate to charities, and give money to anyone he felt was in need. He was a mathematical saint, a man who had stripped his life down to its absolute essentials: thinking, sharing, and helping others to think. His life was a beautiful, chaotic, and deeply inspiring paradox. He was a man with no home, who was at home everywhere, a man with no family, who had the largest family in the world. He was a man who lived a life of almost monastic simplicity, yet who created a legacy of unparalleled richness and complexity. Paul Erdos shows us that genius can be a team sport. He proves that the greatest ideas are not always born in solitude, but can emerge from the messy, caffeinated, and joyous chaos of human connection. His brain was always open, and in doing so, he opened the minds of thousands of others. His life was his greatest theorem, and it's one we're still learning how to solve. From the man who connected the entire world of mathematics, we now descend into the life of a man who was so disconnected, so profoundly isolated, that he became a ghost in his own life. At number 7, we meet Oliver Heaviside, a self-taught deaf and cantankerous English genius, whose contributions to physics and electrical engineering are so fundamental that they are literally woven into the fabric of our modern hyper-connected world. Yet, he lived and died in almost complete obscurity, a bizarre hermit who replaced his furniture with giant blocks of granite and painted his fingernails a shocking shade of pink. His story is a chilling reminder that the minds that give us the clearest signals are sometimes the ones that are most completely lost in the noise. Oliver Heaviside was born in Camden, London in 1850. His childhood was a litany of misfortunes. He grew up in poverty and a bout of scarlet fever in his youth. left him partially deaf. This deafness cut him off from the world, enclosing him in a bubble of silence and forcing him to rely on his own internal resources. He left school at 16, with no formal education beyond the basics. By all accounts, his life should have been a quiet one, a story of struggle and obscurity. But inside this quiet, isolated young man, a mind of ferocious power was beginning to awaken. He became an autodidact, a voracious, self-directed learner. He devoured books on physics and mathematics, teaching himself subjects so complex that they were usually reserved for the most elite university students. He was particularly drawn to the work of James Clerk Maxwell, whose newly published treatise on electromagnetism was a dense, almost impenetrable thicket of equations that had baffled even the most brilliant physicists of the day. But Heaviside, the deaf, uneducated telegraph operator, saw through the complexity. He saw the beautiful, simple truth hidden within Maxwell's notoriously difficult equations. And so, in the solitude of his small room, he embarked on a mission. He decided to rewrite the laws of electromagnetism. It was an act of incredible intellectual audacity. For years, he worked in complete isolation, a lone warrior battling a mathematical beast. The result was a work of pure genius. He took Maxwell's original 20 equations, a cumbersome and unwieldy mess, and distilled them down into the 4 elegant, powerful vector equations that we know today as Maxwell's equations. It was a feat of mathematical and conceptual simplification so profound that it's akin to taking a whole library of dense legal texts and reducing them to the 10 Commandments. He didn't just simplify, he innovated. He invented a whole new mathematical toolkit, which he called operational calculus, a set of powerful but controversial methods for solving complex differential equations. Mainstream mathematicians were horrified. His methods were unorthodox, they lacked formal rigor, and they were invented by an outsider with no credentials. They dismissed his work as nonsense, but engineers loved it. Why? Because it worked. Heaviside's strange new math could solve practical problems in telegraphy and electrical circuits that had stumped everyone else. He was a pragmatist, a man who cared more about finding the right answer than following the proper rules. He had bridged the gap between the abstract world of theoretical physics and the real world of engineering. His breakthroughs were monumental. He introduced the concept of impedance. He co-invented vector calculus. He predicted, based on pure theory, the existence of a layer in the Earth's upper atmosphere that could reflect radio waves, a layer we now call the Kennelly-Heaviside layer, or more simply, the ionosphere. This prediction was the theoretical foundation for long-distance radio communication. The man who could barely hear was the one who showed the rest of the world how to talk to each other across oceans. But the world wasn't always listening. His abrasive personality, his lack of academic pedigree, and the radical nature of his ideas meant that he was constantly at odds with the scientific establishment. He was a prophet who was not just without honor in his own country, but who was actively ridiculed by it. The constant rejection and lack of recognition took their toll. As he grew older, Heaviside retreated further and further into himself. He became a full-blown eccentric, a recluse who lived a life of bizarre, self-imposed austerity. He moved to a small house in the English countryside and cut himself off from almost all human contact. And it was here that his strangeness blossomed into full, glorious flower. He furnished his house not with chairs and tables, but with huge, rough-hewn blocks of granite. He would sit for hours on these cold, hard stones, lost in thought. He subsisted almost entirely on milk, believing it to be the perfect food. His only companions were the spiders in his house, whom he treated with a strange, gentle respect. And then, There were his fingernails. For reasons that we will never understand, he began to paint them a bright, vibrant shade of pink. Imagine this scene. A brilliant, elderly physicist, a man who had wrestled with the fundamental laws of the universe, sitting alone in a room filled with rocks, sipping milk with perfectly manicured, shocking pink nails. It's a vision of such profound and poignant strangeness that it's almost heartbreaking. It was as if he was trying to create his own private, logical, and utterly bizarre world, a world where the rules made sense only to him. He would spend his days writing, filling pages with his dense, difficult-to-read mathematical arguments, and firing off angry letters to the editors of scientific journals who had wronged him. He was a king in a kingdom of stone and silence. Oliver Heaviside's story is a tragedy of intellectual isolation. He was a man who gave the world the tools to build the modern age of communication, yet he died in poverty and obscurity, almost completely alone. Much of his work was only fully appreciated. Long after his death, he was the ghost in the machine, the invisible architect of the wireless world. His life is a stark and unsettling testament to the fact that genius is not enough. The world must be ready to listen. And for Oliver Heaviside, the man who dreamed in equations and lived on milk and granite, the world was, for too long, tragically deaf. From the tragic hermit who connected the world while cutting himself off from it, we now journey even deeper into the strange, silent corridors of the human mind. At number 6, we encounter a man so pathologically shy, so allergic to human contact, that he makes Oliver Heaviside look like a social butterfly. His name is Henry Cavendish, and he was an 18th century English aristocrat and scientist who was, quite possibly, the strangest man who ever lived. He was a phantom, a whisper, a man who went to almost superhuman lengths to avoid his fellow human beings, especially women. Yet, from within this fortress of solitude, this ghost in a powdered wig produced some of the most precise and foundational scientific work in history. His story is a mind-bending exploration of the outer limits of introversion, a testament to the idea that a mind, when turned completely inward, can somehow manage to measure the entire world. Henry Cavendish was born into the highest echelons of the British aristocracy. His grandfathers were both dukes. He was fantastically, stupendously wealthy. He had all the privileges that birth and money could afford. He could have been a politician, a socialite, a patron of the arts. He could have been anything he wanted. But what he wanted, more than anything else in the world, was to be left alone, completely and utterly alone. From a very early age, it was clear that Cavendish was not just shy. He was operating on a different plane of social existence. He found direct human interaction to be physically painful. The sound of a stranger's voice, the need to make eye contact, the crushing obligation of small talk. These were not mere annoyances for him. They were a form of torture. So, he used his immense fortune to construct a life that was a masterpiece of social avoidance. He owned a lavish mansion in London, but he treated it less like a home and more like a scientific instrument. He converted the grand drawing rooms into laboratories, the stables into a forge. The sprawling lawns were used for atmospheric experiments. The house was a temple of science, and he was its solitary high priest. He had a vast library in another building, and he had a strict rule for borrowing his own books. He would sign a formal receipt just as any other visitor would. He was a stranger in his own life. His interactions with his servants were the stuff of legend. He communicated with his housekeeper almost exclusively through written notes left on a table in the hall. If he had a request, he would write it down. If she had a question, she was to write it down. A face-to-face conversation was an emergency measure, a catastrophic failure of the system. He was so terrified of encountering his female servants that he had a separate staircase built onto the back of his house so that he could move between his laboratory and his bedroom without ever running the risk of accidentally crossing paths with a maid in the hallway. The mere sight of a woman was enough to send him into a panic. One story tells of a time he was walking in his garden and unexpectedly came upon a housemaid. He was so horrified that he let out a terrified cry, clutched his face in his hands, and fled back into the house, never to use that path again. He immediately wrote a note to his housekeeper, ordering the instant dismissal of the offending maid. He had only one social outlet, the weekly meetings of the Royal Society, a club for the scientific gentlemen of London. But even here, his behavior was bizarre. He would attend the dinners, but he would often hover by the door, a silent, awkward figure in a faded, old-fashioned coat, clutching his three-cornered hat. If a fellow scientist tried to approach him directly, Cavendish would often become so flustered that he would simply bolt from the room and run out into the night. His colleagues, who respected his brilliant mind, developed a special technique for conversing with him. They would stand near him in a small group and talk about him in the third person, as if he weren't there. "I wonder what Mr. Cavendish thinks about the phlogiston theory," one might say. If Cavendish felt comfortable enough, he might offer a mumbled, high-pitched reply without ever making eye contact. It was the only way to draw a few precious words from the ghost in their midst. He wore the same clothes every day, a violet-colored suit that was decades out of style. If a suit became too worn, he would simply order an identical one to replace it. He ordered the same meal for dinner every single night, a leg of mutton. One night, his servants asked if he might like something different for a change. He replied, with a hint of irritation, "Then have 2 legs of mutton." His world was a tightly controlled system, a machine designed to eliminate all variables, all surprises, all messy, unpredictable human elements. His life was a controlled experiment, and the goal was to achieve a state of perfect, undisturbed equilibrium. He was a man who was trying to build a firewall between himself and the chaos of the human heart. And from behind this wall, in the deep, profound silence of his self-imposed exile, he began to systematically deconstruct the physical world. It is one of the most beautiful and baffling ironies in the history of science. The man who could not bear to be near another human being was the one who would, for the first time, accurately measure the gravitational attraction between 2 objects. The man who lived in a state of almost total sensory deprivation was the one who would perform some of the most exquisitely sensitive experiments ever devised. Henry Cavendish's laboratory was not just a room in his house, it was the entire universe scaled down and brought under his solitary obsessive control. His scientific work was the mirror image of his social life, precise, methodical, and stripped of all extraneous elements. He was not a flashy theorist. He did not chase grand, unifying ideas. He was a master of measurement. His genius lay in his almost unbelievable patience and his fanatical attention to detail. He was a man who could see the invisible forces that govern the world, and he was determined to weigh and measure them. His list of accomplishments is staggering, and what's even more staggering is that he didn't bother to publish most of them. He was doing science not for fame, not for recognition, but for the pure private satisfaction of knowing. His notebooks, which were only examined long after his death, were a treasure trove of discoveries that he had made decades before anyone else. He discovered, or at least anticipated, nearly all the major laws of electricity that would later be attributed to Ohm, Coulomb, and Faraday. He understood the concept of electrical potential, or voltage. He distinguished between conductors and insulators. He essentially laid out the entire framework of electrical science in his private notes, and then simply filed them away, uninterested in sharing his discoveries with a world he so desperately wished to avoid. But his most famous achievement, and one of the few he did publish, is the one that seems most poetically at odds with his reclusive nature. It is known as the Cavendish experiment, and its goal was nothing less than to weigh the earth. Imagine the audacity. This strange, silent man, who was terrified of a housemaid, set out to determine the mass of the entire planet on which he lived. To do this, he constructed an apparatus of incredible sensitivity in a sealed room on his estate. It consisted of a torsion balance, a delicate instrument with two small lead balls suspended from a thin wire. He then brought two much larger, heavier lead balls close to the smaller ones. The idea was to measure the infinitesimally small gravitational pull between the large balls and the small ones. The force was so tiny, about 1/50 millionth of the weight of the small balls, that the slightest disturbance could ruin the experiment. A draft of air, a change in temperature, even the gravitational pull of Cavendish's own body could throw off the results. So he operated the entire experiment by remote control from outside the sealed room. He used a series of ropes and pulleys to move the large weights, and he observed the tiny deflection of the torsion balance using a telescope set up in a hole in the wall. For months he worked in the dark, a silent observer peering into his own miniature man-made universe. The results he obtained were astonishingly accurate. His calculation for the density of the Earth was only about 1% off from the value we accept today. It was a tour de force of experimental physics, a measurement of such delicacy and precision that it would not be improved upon for almost a century. The man who had shrunk his own world down to the size of a single room had managed to reach out and place the entire planet on a scale. He also performed groundbreaking work in chemistry. He was the first person to recognize hydrogen as a distinct element, which he called inflammable air. He was the one who discovered that water was not an element, as had been believed for thousands of years, but was a compound made of 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. He was a man who was systematically dismantling the ancient, incorrect ideas about the world and replacing them with cold, hard, measured facts. He did it all alone, in silence, without a single collaborator. Henry Cavendish is a profound and unsettling paradox. Was his extreme shyness a mental illness? Almost certainly. But was it also, in some strange way, the key to his genius? By eliminating the noise and distraction of human relationships, he was able to achieve a level of focus and concentration that is almost unimaginable. His mind was a still, clear pool, and in its depths, he could see the faint, subtle ripples of the universe's fundamental laws. He was a man who traded the warmth of human connection for the cold, beautiful clarity of scientific truth. He lived a life that was, by any normal standard, deeply impoverished. But in the silent, ordered world of his laboratory, he was a king. He was the ghost who weighed the world. Our descent into the bizarre now takes a sharp, raucous turn. We leave behind the silent laboratories of the Enlightenment and plunge headfirst into the chaotic, brawling, and gloriously messy world of the Renaissance. At number 5, we meet a man who was part scientist, part magician, part con artist, an all-rock star. His name was Paracelsus, and he was a Swiss physician and alchemist who took the staid, respectable world of 16th century medicine and set it on fire, both figuratively and, on at least one occasion, literally. He was an arrogant, drunken, and revolutionary genius who single-handedly dragged medicine out of the Dark Ages, kicking and screaming. His story isn't one of quiet contemplation. It's a full-blown intellectual riot. To understand how radical Paracelsus was, you have to understand the world of medicine he was born into. In the early 1500s, medicine was a fossil. It was completely dominated by the ancient texts of Greek and Roman physicians like Galen and Avicenna. For over 1,000 years, these books had been treated not as guides, but as infallible holy scripture. Doctors didn't treat patients, they treated texts. Their job was to diagnose a disease based on what Galen had written centuries ago, and then apply the prescribed remedy, usually some combination of bloodletting, purging, and foul-tasting herbal concoctions. It was a system based on blind obedience to ancient authority, not on observation or experience. And it was, for the most part, spectacularly ineffective. Into this stuffy, dogmatic, and frankly lethal world strode Paracelsus like a tornado in a library. His real name was Theophrastus von Hohenheim, but he gave himself the name Paracelsus, which means beyond Celsus, a famous Roman physician. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a declaration that he was superior to the venerated masters of the past, and he never let anyone forget it. He was a man of colossal ego and zero patience for tradition. He was a wanderer, a medical vagabond who traveled all over Europe, from the mines of Germany to the battlefields of Italy, learning his craft not from dusty old books, but from the real world. He learned from barbers, who were the surgeons of the day. He learned from executioners, who had a practical knowledge of anatomy. He learned from miners, who understood the properties of metals and minerals. And he learned from alchemists, who were the chemists of his era. He was a man who believed that knowledge was found not in the university, but in the gutter and on the road. His personality was as explosive as his ideas. He was a notorious drunkard, known for his marathon tavern sessions and his belligerent, confrontational style. He carried a huge two-handed sword with him at all times, which he called his Azoth, and which he claimed held the secrets of alchemy in its pommel. He was a showman, a provocateur, a man who seemed to take a perverse delight in offending the powerful and the respected. His career was a series of brilliant successes, followed by chaotic, self-inflicted disasters. He would be hired by a city or a nobleman, achieve some miraculous cures, and then inevitably be run out of town after insulting everyone in sight. His most famous and most inflammatory act took place in the city of Basel, where he had been appointed as the city physician and a professor at the university. On St. John's Day in 1527, he made a public announcement that he would be giving a lecture. A crowd of students and faculty gathered, expecting a traditional academic discourse. Instead, Paracelsus stood before them next to a roaring bonfire. In a dramatic gesture, he held up the most revered medical textbooks of the era, the works of Galen and Avicenna, books that were worth a fortune, and with a sneer, he threw them into the flames. As the priceless manuscripts curled into ash, he declared that his own shoelaces knew more than these ancient quacks. He then proceeded to give his lecture, not in Latin, the sacred language of academia, but in plain common German, so that everyone, not just the elite, could understand him. You cannot overstate how shocking this was. This was the 16th century equivalent of a modern physicist walking into a conference, burning a copy of Einstein's papers, and then giving a lecture in slang. It was an act of open rebellion, a declaration of war against the entire medical establishment. The faculty was apoplectic. Paracelsus had not just challenged their authority, he had spat on their entire worldview. It was the beginning of the end of his time in Basel. After a series of bitter disputes over his salary and his unorthodox methods, he was forced to flee the city in the dead of night, narrowly avoiding arrest. This was the pattern of his life, a flash of brilliance, a storm of controversy, and then a hasty escape. He was a man who was constitutionally incapable of playing by the rules, but it was this very refusal to accept the status quo that made him a revolutionary. Beneath the drunken, sword-wielding, book-burning theatrics was a mind of profound and transformative genius. Paracelsus may have been a chaotic and destructive force, but he was a creative one. In the rubble of the ancient medicine he so gleefully demolished, he laid the foundations for a new modern approach to healing. His contributions were so fundamental that we now take most of them for granted. He was a man who didn't just break the rules, he rewrote the rulebook. His first and most important principle was that experience, not ancient texts, should be the ultimate guide for a physician. He famously said, "The patients are your textbook, the sickbed is your study." This was a radical idea in an age that worshipped the authority of the past. He urged doctors to stop reading and start observing, to learn from the human body itself. He performed his own dissections, studied the progression of diseases, and experimented with new treatments. He was an empiricist, a man who believed in data long before the word was even in common use. He was also the first person to argue that diseases were specific entities caused by external agents that attacked the body. The prevailing theory at the time was the doctrine of humors, which held that sickness was caused by an imbalance of the four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. To Paracelsus, this was nonsense. He believed that each disease, like syphilis or the plague, was a distinct invader that required a specific remedy to defeat it. This doctrine of signatures was the conceptual forerunner of modern germ theory. He was the one who shifted the focus from rebalancing the body's internal environment to fighting an external enemy. This led him to his most revolutionary and controversial idea: the use of chemicals and minerals as medicine. The doctors of his day relied almost exclusively on herbs. Paracelsus, drawing on his knowledge of alchemy and mining, began to experiment with compounds of mercury, sulfur, iron, and antimony. This was the birth of pharmacology and chemical therapy. He understood that these substances were poisons, but he also understood a principle that is now the bedrock of modern toxicology. He famously wrote, "All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not a poison." This is the core concept of the dose-response relationship. It was a moment of staggering insight. He realized that the same substance that could kill could also cure, if administered in the right amount. He successfully used mercury to treat syphilis, a disease that had been a virtual death sentence until then. He was playing with fire, but he was getting results. He was also a pioneer in areas we would now consider occupational medicine and psychology. He wrote the first major treatise on the diseases of miners, linking their illnesses to the inhalation of metal vapors and dust, and proposing ventilation as a solution. He was one of the first physicians to argue that mental illnesses were not caused by demonic possession, but were true diseases of the mind that required compassionate treatment. He was a man who saw the connections between the environment, the body, and the mind in a way that was centuries ahead of his time. Paracelsus was a walking contradiction. He was a scientist who believed in gnomes and elementals. He was a brilliant doctor who was also an insufferable egomaniac. He was a man who sought truth, but who often behaved like a charlatan. But his legacy is undeniable. He was the great disruptor, the medical Martin Luther, who nailed his thesis to the door of a corrupt and stagnant establishment. He forced medicine to look away from the past and toward the future. He may have been a drunk, a braggart, and a deeply unpleasant man to be around, but he was also a visionary. He understood that sometimes, to heal a sick system, you first have to give it a powerful dose of poison. And Paracelsus, in all his bizarre glory, was just the poison the world of medicine needed. Our expedition into the minds of history's most eccentric innovators now takes a sharp turn, leaving the tangible world of medicine and chemistry to enter a realm of pure, abstract thought. At number 4, we encounter a figure shrouded in legend, a man who was part mathematician, part cult leader, and part musical theorist, with a mortal terror of beans. His name is Pythagoras of Samos, and he is a ghost in the machine of Western civilization. You know his name from the first geometry class you ever took. But the man behind the famous theorem was infinitely stranger and more mystical than any textbook could ever convey. He wasn't just a man who liked triangles. He was a guru who believed that the universe was made of numbers, and he founded a secretive brotherhood dedicated to this sacred numerical truth. His story is a bizarre and beautiful reminder that the roots of science are often entangled with the deepest, strangest shoots of spirituality. Imagine a scene from the 6th century BCE in the Greek colony of Croton in southern Italy. The Mediterranean sun beats down on a white-walled villa secluded from the bustling town. Inside, a community of men and women, all dressed in simple white linen, live a life of strict discipline and quiet contemplation. They are the Pythagoreans, the devoted followers of the master, Pythagoras. This is not a school in the modern sense. It's a cult, a commune, a secret society with an elaborate system of rules, rituals, and initiations. The members share all their property, live a vegetarian lifestyle, and are sworn to absolute secrecy. They are on a spiritual quest, and their path to enlightenment is not through prayer or meditation in the traditional sense, but through the study of numbers. At the heart of their belief system was a single, radical idea that reality itself is mathematical. They believed that everything in the cosmos, from the orbits of the planets to the vibrations of a musical note, could be understood and expressed through numerical ratios. Numbers weren't just symbols for counting things. They were the fundamental building blocks of the universe, the divine thoughts of the Creator made manifest. To study geometry was to study the mind of God. This was a revolutionary concept, a breathtaking leap of the intellect that would set the course for the next 2.5 millennia of Western thought. It was the birth of the idea that the universe is rational, knowable, and written in the language of mathematics. But this profound philosophical insight was wrapped in a thick, bizarre layer of mystical dogma and strange taboos. To be a Pythagorean was to live by a code of conduct that was as baffling as it was strict. There were rules for everything. You were forbidden to stir a fire with a knife, to step over a crossbar, or to leave the imprint of a pot in the ashes. You were instructed to always put on your right shoe before your left. These were not mere suggestions. They were sacred laws, the violation of which could lead to expulsion from the brotherhood. The sect was divided into an inner circle of initiates, the mathematicoi, who were privy to the deepest secrets of the master, and an outer circle of acolytes, the ekosmatikoi, who were only allowed to listen to his teachings from behind a curtain. And then there was the most famous and most perplexing rule of all, the absolute, unconditional prohibition of beans. You could not eat them. You could not touch them. You could not even walk through a field where they were growing. The Pythagorean aversion to beans was so extreme it became legendary throughout the ancient world. Why this mortal terror of a humble legume? The theories are as numerous as they are strange. Some ancient writers suggested it was because beans resembled human fetuses, and to eat one was a form of cannibalism. Others claimed it was because beans caused flatulence, and to pass gas was to release a portion of one's own soul, or breath of life. Still others believed that the hollow stems of bean plants were ladders for the souls of the dead to climb back up to the world of the living. Whatever the reason, the prohibition was deadly serious. The most famous story about Pythagoras' death is a direct consequence of his favophobia. According to the legend, he was being chased by his enemies when he came to the edge of a large field of fava beans. He stopped dead in his tracks. His pursuers were closing in, brandishing their weapons. His followers urged him to run, to save himself. But Pythagoras refused. He would rather die, he declared, than trample on the sacred beans. And so he was caught and killed, a martyr to his own bizarre dietary restrictions. It's a story so strange, it has to be true. Imagine it, one of the most influential minds in human history. A man who unlocked the numerical secrets of the cosmos, brought down by a vegetable. It's the ultimate intellectual paradox, a moment where the sublime and the ridiculous collide with fatal consequences. This bizarre, cult-like atmosphere, with its secret handshakes, strange taboos, and fanatical devotion to a charismatic leader, seems a world away from the cool, rational discipline of mathematics. But for Pythagoras and his followers, there was no contradiction. The study of numbers was a mystical path, a way to purify the soul and achieve a state of harmony with the universe. Mathematics was their religion, and Pythagoras was their prophet. He was a man who saw the soul of the world in the elegant, perfect relationships between numbers, and the ideas that emerged from this strange, bean-hating commune would echo through the ages, shaping the very foundations of Western science, philosophy, and music. It is one of the great tragedies of intellectual history that Pythagoras himself wrote nothing down. Everything we know about him comes from the writings of his followers and critics, often centuries after his death. He is a figure who is more myth than man, a legend whose life story is a tangled web of historical fact and fantastical embellishment. But the legacy of the ideas that bear his name is undeniable. The Pythagorean Brotherhood, for all its cultish eccentricities, was a crucible of revolutionary thought, and the sparks that flew from it would ignite the minds of generations to come. At the core of their teaching was the discovery that the harmonious intervals of music could be expressed as simple numerical ratios. This was a moment of earth-shattering revelation. They experimented with a monochord, a single-stringed instrument, and found by dividing the string into simple whole number ratios, they could produce the consonant sounds that are the basis of all music. Halving the string produced an octave. Dividing it in a 2-3 ratio produced a perfect fifth. A 3-4 ratio produced a perfect fourth. It was proof, for the first time, that the abstract, invisible world of musical harmony was governed by the same beautiful rational laws as the visible world of geometry. The universe, they concluded, was a grand musical instrument, a harmony of the spheres, where each planet in its orbit produced a unique note in a divine cosmic symphony. We couldn't hear this music, they argued, only because we had been hearing it since birth. This discovery, that the universe was fundamentally mathematical and musical, was the single most important idea to emerge from the Pythagorean school. It was the idea that would inspire Plato's theory of forms, that would guide the astronomical work of Kepler, and that would culminate 2,000 years later in the scientific revolution of Galileo and Newton. The belief that nature is governed by simple, elegant mathematical laws is the foundational assumption of all modern physics, and it began here in this strange, secretive brotherhood in southern Italy. And then there is the theorem that bears his name, the idea that for any right-angled triangle, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. It is, quite possibly, the most famous equation in the world. It's unlikely that Pythagoras was the first person to discover this relationship. The Babylonians and Egyptians knew of it in a practical sense for centuries before him, but the Pythagoreans were the first to prove it, to demonstrate its universal truth through a process of pure logical deduction. This was their great gift to the world, the concept of a mathematical proof. The idea that you could establish an eternal, unshakable truth, not through observation or experiment, but through the power of reason alone. But this very commitment to the perfection of numbers would lead them to a discovery so terrifying, so subversive, that they tried to suppress it. The legend goes that one of the brothers, Hippasus of Metapontum, was playing with the theorem. He considered a simple right-angled triangle with two sides of equal length, say 1 unit. According to the theorem, the length of the hypotenuse would be the square root of 2. He tried to express this number as a simple ratio, a fraction of two whole numbers, as the Pythagorean dogma demanded, and he couldn't. He realized, with a growing sense of horror, that it was impossible. The square root of 2 was an irrational number, a number that could not be expressed as a simple fraction, a number that went on forever without repeating. This discovery was a catastrophe. It was a crack in the beautiful, rational facade of their numerical universe. It was a mathematical demon, a flaw in the mind of God. It suggested that there were truths in the universe that could not be contained within the elegant system of whole number ratios. The dogma was broken. The story goes that the Pythagoreans were so horrified by this discovery that they took Hippasus out to sea and threw him overboard, drowning him and his terrible secret in the depths of the Mediterranean. It's a chilling tale, a reminder that even the most rational of pursuits can be twisted into a fanatical, violent dogma. Pythagoras is a figure of profound and beautiful contradictions. He was a rationalist, who was also a mystic. He was a man who gave the world the concept of proof, but who demanded blind faith from his followers. He was a genius who saw the mathematical harmony of the cosmos, but who was terrified of a simple being. His legacy is a powerful testament to the idea that the birth of science was not a clean, logical process. It was messy, passionate, and deeply intertwined with the human quest for spiritual meaning. He showed the world that the universe could be understood, but he also warned us, through the story of his own strange life, that the pursuit of knowledge can be a dangerous and bewildering path. We now plunge from the sun-drenched shores of ancient Greece into the dark, feverish imagination of late medieval Europe. At number 3, we confront a mind so uniquely unsettling, so wildly inventive, that his work continues to haunt and fascinate us 5 centuries after his death. His name is Hieronymus Bosch, and he was a Dutch painter who created some of the most bizarre, nightmarish, and utterly unforgettable images in the history of art. He was a man who painted his dreams, or perhaps his nightmares, onto wooden panels with the meticulous precision of a master craftsman. To look at a Bosch painting is to take a guided tour of a medieval funhouse, a hallucinatory landscape populated by hybrid monsters, fantastical demons, and human souls undergoing the most creative and grotesque of torments. He was a man about whom we know almost nothing, but whose art tells us everything we need to know about the anxieties and obsessions of a world teetering on the edge of modernity. Hieronymus Bosch lived and worked in the small Dutch town of 's-Hertogenbosch his entire life, from the mid-15th century until his death in 1516. That's pretty much all we know for certain. He was a respected member of a conservative religious confraternity. He married a woman of some wealth. He fulfilled commissions for the local church and for aristocratic patrons. On the surface, his life was utterly conventional, the life of a prosperous, pious, small-town artisan. But behind this placid facade, a mind of terrifying originality was at work. In the privacy of his studio, he was opening a portal to another dimension, a world that was equal parts heaven, hell, and a surrealist circus. His most famous work, and the one that best encapsulates his bizarre genius, is the triptych known as the Garden of Earthly Delights. It is a painting so dense, so packed with hallucinatory detail, that you could spend a lifetime exploring its strange corners and still not uncover all its secrets. It's less a painting and more a universe. The left panel depicts the Garden of Eden, but it's an Eden that is already subtly corrupted. Strange, alien-looking creatures crawl out of a primordial pond. The fountain of life looks like a bizarre pink alchemical contraption. There is a sense of impending doom of innocence already lost. The central panel, the garden of the title, is a sprawling panoramic vision of humanity, indulging in every conceivable form of earthly pleasure. Naked figures frolic in a landscape of impossible beauty and surreal strangeness. They ride on the backs of giant birds, cavort with mythical beasts, and feast on oversized fruit. It's a scene of sensual, dreamlike anarchy. Is it a celebration of a lost paradise, a world without shame or sin? Or is it a dire warning, a depiction of humanity lost in a sea of carnal indulgence, oblivious to the damnation that awaits? Art historians have been arguing about it for 500 years. It's a moral ambiguity that is both thrilling and deeply unsettling. But it is the right panel. The one depicting hell, that is the true showcase for Bosch's terrifying imagination. This is not the traditional hell of fire and brimstone. It is a psychological hell, a meticulously orchestrated nightmare of surreal torture and eternal punishment. It's a dark, frozen landscape, illuminated by the fires of burning cities in the distance. The damned are subjected to punishments that are grotesque, ironic, and strangely personal. A glutton is being eternally force-fed by a bird-headed demon who sits on a high chair that is also a toilet, defecating the souls he has consumed into a pit below. A gambler is being crucified on a giant harp by a demon. A musician is being tormented by an oversized lute. A nun is being seduced by a pig wearing a veil. At the center of it all is the tree man, a hollow, egg-shaped torso with tree-like legs, whose mournful face looks back over his shoulder at the viewer. A self-portrait, perhaps, of the artist himself, presiding over his own private hell. To look at this panel is to feel as though you have ingested a powerful hallucinogen. It's a world that operates on the logic of a fever dream. The laws of physics, biology, and common sense have all been suspended. It's a vision so singular, so completely out of step with the art of its time, that it's almost impossible to believe it was painted in the 15th century. It feels modern. It feels like something that Salvador Dali or Max Ernst might have painted after a particularly bad trip. Where did these images come from? Was Bosch a member of some obscure heretical cult? Was he using his art to encode secret alchemical knowledge? Or was he simply a man with an imagination so powerful, so untethered from conventional reality, that he was able to tap directly into the dark, chaotic waters of the human subconscious? His other paintings are just as strange. In his Temptation of Saint Anthony, the hermit saint is besieged not by seductive women, but by a parade of monstrous hybrid demons, a fish in a funnel, a man with the head of a thistle, a creature that is half nun, half crawfish. In his Haywain triptych, all of humanity from the Pope and the Emperor down to the lowliest peasant, is shown frantically trying to grab a handful of hay from a giant cart that is being pulled by demons straight into hell. The hay, of course, represents the fleeting, worthless pleasures of the world. It's a message of profound pessimism, a belief that humanity is a foolish, greedy, and self-destructive species, marching blindly towards its own damnation. Bosch's art is a puzzle with no solution. He left behind no letters, no diaries, no explanations for his work. He was a silent prophet who spoke only in the language of monsters and dreams. He was a man who seemed to have a direct, unmediated view into the darkest corners of the human soul. He understood our capacity for sin, our foolishness, our anxieties, and our terror of the unknown. He took the collective nightmares of the medieval world and gave them form, painting the unpaintable. For centuries, he was dismissed as a mere fantasist, a painter of drolleries and grotesques. But in the 20th century, with the advent of psychoanalysis and surrealism, he was rediscovered and hailed as a visionary, a proto-surrealist who had explored the landscapes of the ID 400 years before Freud. He was a man who understood that the real monsters are not the ones with wings and claws, but the ones that lurk within our own minds. His genius was not just in his technical skill, which was immense, but in his psychological insight. He was a cartographer of the soul's dark territories. He painted a world that was falling apart, a world where faith was failing, and the old certainties were crumbling into dust. And in the strange, beautiful, and terrifying mirror of his art, we can still see the reflection of our own anxieties, our own temptations, and our own private hells. He was the man who painted fear itself. Our journey into the bizarre now blasts off from the hellish landscapes of the human psyche and into the cold, silent, and perfect expanse of the cosmos. At number 2, we meet a man whose life was a supernova of brilliance, eccentricity, and pure, unadulterated drama. His name is Tycho Brahe, and he was a 16th century Danish astronomer who was part nobleman, part party animal, part scientific revolutionary, and all character. He was a man who lost his nose in a drunken sword duel over a mathematical formula, wore a metal prosthetic for the rest of his life, owned a pet moose that died after getting drunk at a dinner party, and who himself may have died because his bladder exploded from being too polite. He lived a life of such epic, almost unbelievable strangeness that it threatens to overshadow his monumental contribution to science. But beneath the gold nose and the drunken moose was the most meticulous, obsessive, and important astronomical observer in history. His story is a loud, flamboyant, and ultimately tragic opera, a testament to the idea that the path to the stars is sometimes paved with gold guts and sheer glorious absurdity. Tycho Brahe was born into the highest ranks of the Danish nobility in 1546. He was destined for a life of politics and diplomacy, the comfortable, predictable life of a powerful aristocrat. But the universe had other plans. As a young man, he witnessed a solar eclipse, and he was thunderstruck. He was not amazed by the celestial event itself, but by the fact that the astronomers had been able to predict it. It was a revelation. He realized that the heavens were not a realm of divine caprice, but a grand celestial clockwork, a system governed by precise mathematical laws. From that moment on, he was hooked. He abandoned his training in law and devoted himself with a single-minded, obsessive passion to the study of the stars. His noble family was horrified. In their world, stargazing was a hobby for idle dilettantes, not a serious pursuit for a man of his station. But Tycho was as stubborn as he was brilliant. He began to buy up astronomical instruments and conduct his own observations. and it was during his university years in Germany that the first legendary chapter of his bizarre life was written. The story goes that Tycho, then a hot-headed young man of 20, got into a heated argument with another Danish nobleman at a party. The subject of their dispute, a mathematical formula. They couldn't agree on who was the better mathematician. The argument escalated, insults were exchanged, and a duel was declared. In the darkness of a cold December evening, they faced each other with rapiers. In the ensuing fight, a slash from his opponent's sword sliced off the bridge of Tycho's nose. For the rest of his life, he was forced to wear a prosthetic nose. According to his contemporaries, he had a whole collection of them for different occasions. There was a simple one, made of copper and wax, for everyday use. And for formal events, there was a magnificent one, crafted from an alloy of silver and gold, which he would attach with a special adhesive paste. Imagine the sight: a towering red-haired Danish nobleman with a fiery temper and a gleaming metallic nose. He was a man who had literally sacrificed a piece of his own face for the honor of mathematics. It was a perfect and perfectly bizarre symbol of his entire life, a fusion of aristocratic pride, intellectual passion, and pure theatrical strangeness. But the gold nose was just the beginning. Tycho's career took a dramatic turn in 1572 when he observed a new star in the constellation Cassiopeia. We now know this was a supernova, the explosive death of a distant star. But in Tycho's time, it was a cosmological crisis. The prevailing wisdom inherited from Aristotle was that the heavens were perfect, eternal, and unchanging. The appearance of a new star was a direct contradiction of this ancient dogma. Tycho meticulously measured its position, night after night, and proved, through a lack of parallax, that it was not an atmospheric phenomenon, but was located far out in the realm of the fixed stars. The heavens were not unchanging. The old world model was broken. This discovery made him famous throughout Europe. The King of Denmark, Frederick II, was so impressed that he made Tycho an offer he couldn't refuse. He gave him the entire island of Heaven, located in the sound between Denmark and Sweden, along with a massive annual budget, equivalent to a significant percentage of the entire Danish national product. His mission: to build the greatest astronomical observatory the world had ever seen. It was the 16th century equivalent of NASA's budget, all given to one man. And Tycho, who had a flair for the dramatic and a love of the good life, did not disappoint. On his island kingdom, he built a scientific palace that was part laboratory, part castle, and part Renaissance theme park. He called it Uraniborg, the castle of the heavens. Uraniborg was a marvel of science and architecture. It was a magnificent, turreted building, complete with alchemical laboratories in the basement, a printing press for publishing his own work, and even an intercom system made of speaking tubes. The main domes on the roof housed his collection of enormous, custom-built astronomical instruments, giant quadrants, sextants, and armillary spheres, all crafted from wood and brass and calibrated with unprecedented precision. This was not a place for a solitary, humble scholar. It was a grand, theatrical stage for the performance of science, and Tycho was the star of the show. He lived on heaven like a king. He ruled over the local peasants with an iron fist, forcing them to labor on his grand construction projects. He hosted lavish, multi-day banquets for visiting nobles and scholars, parties that were legendary for their opulence and their sheer, unadulterated weirdness. He had a court jester, a dwarf named Jep, who he believed was clairvoyant. Jep would sit under the dining table during banquets, and Tycho would occasionally toss him scraps of food and ask for his psychic insights. It was at one of these legendary parties that the most famous and tragic member of Tycho's bizarre menagerie met his end. Tycho owned a pet moose. The moose would follow him around the castle like a loyal dog. One day, a visiting nobleman took a liking to the animal and invited it to his own party on the mainland. The moose, sadly, had a taste for Danish beer. It drank so much that it became intoxicated, lost its footing on a staircase, fell, and broke its leg. It died soon after. The story of the drunken, party-loving moose became a sensation, a perfect symbol of the strange, hedonistic, and almost surreal world that Tycho had built for himself on his island of science. He was a man who was living out a fantasy, a man who had bent the world to his own extravagant and eccentric will, and every single night, when the party was over and the guests had staggered off to bed, this flamboyant, metal-nosed party king would climb the steps to his observatory, and he would do the work that would change the world forever. The gold nose, the drunken moose, the psychic dwarf. It's easy to dismiss Tycho Brahe as a colorful but ultimately clownish figure, a footnote in the history of science, famous only for his eccentricities. But to do so would be a catastrophic mistake. The parties, the extravagance, the sheer glorious strangeness of his life on Hivin were just the backdrop. The real story, the one that truly matters, took place in the cold, clear nights, under the silent, watching stars. The work that Tycho did at Uraniborg was not just important, it was the single most important body of observational data ever collected by a single human being. He was not a great theorist. In fact, his own model of the universe was a clunky, incorrect hybrid of the old and new worlds. But he was something far more crucial for his time. He was the greatest observer who had ever lived. Before Tycho, astronomy was a sloppy, inexact science. Astronomers relied on ancient data that was riddled with errors. Their instruments were crude, their methods inconsistent. Tycho changed everything. He understood that to truly understand the heavens, you needed data, vast, precise, and systematically collected over a long period of time. He was the high priest of precision. The instruments he built at Uraniborg were marvels of engineering. His great mural quadrant, a massive brass arc attached to a wall, could measure the position of stars and planets with an accuracy that was 10 times better than anyone who had come before him. He was measuring the sky with the obsessive, fanatical precision of a watchmaker, and he did it every single night. For 21 years, through clear skies and cloudy, through the warmth of summer and the bitter cold of a Danish winter, Tycho and his team of assistants were at their posts. They were creating a new kind of science, a science based not on philosophical speculation, but on the relentless, patient accumulation of hard empirical facts. They cataloged the positions of over 1,000 stars with unprecedented accuracy, but their most important work was on the planets. They tracked the movements of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, night after night, year after year, recording their precise locations as they wandered against the background of the fixed stars. They were creating a database, a celestial archive of such richness and detail that it would become the key that would finally unlock the secrets of the solar system. Tycho's own cosmological model was a strange beast. He couldn't bring himself to accept the Copernican idea that the Earth moved. It violated both common sense and scripture, but he also knew, from his own observations, that the old Ptolemaic, Earth-centered model was wrong. So, he invented a compromise. In the Tychonic system, the Sun and the Moon orbit the Earth, but all the other planets orbit the Sun. It was a clever but ultimately doomed attempt to reconcile the old world with the new data. His genius was not in creating new models, but in creating the data that would allow others to create them. Tycho's reign on his island kingdom came to an end after the death of his patron, King Frederick II. The new king was less impressed with Tycho's science and more annoyed by his arrogance and his extravagant spending. His funding was cut, and in 1597, Tycho was forced to leave Haven, packing up his precious instruments and his even more precious books of data. He became a scientific refugee, wandering through Europe in search of a new patron. He eventually found one in the Holy Roman Emperor, Rudolf II in Prague, and it was here, in the final years of his life, that he made his most important collaboration. He hired a brilliant, young, and deeply mystical German mathematician to be his assistant. That man's name was Johannes Kepler. The relationship between Tycho and Kepler was a clash of titans, a meeting of two completely different kinds of genius. Tycho was the master of data, the man of facts. Kepler was the master of theory, the man of mystical harmonies. Tycho jealously guarded his data, a lifetime of work that he knew was priceless. Kepler desperately needed that data to test his own wild, beautiful theories about the structure of the cosmos. Their partnership was tense, productive, and tragically short-lived. In 1601, Tycho attended a banquet in Prague. According to the legend, his sense of courtly etiquette was so strong that he refused to excuse himself to use the restroom, even though he had been drinking heavily. He sat at the table for hours in growing agony. When he finally returned home, he was unable to urinate and was consumed by a raging fever. He died 11 days later in excruciating pain. His last words were reportedly, "Let me not seem to have lived in vain." It's a bizarre and almost comically tragic end for a man who had lived such a larger-than-life existence. While modern analysis suggests he more likely died from a burst bladder or mercury poisoning, he was a practicing alchemist. The legend of his death by politeness has stuck, a final, absurd chapter, but he did not live in vain. After his death, Kepler finally got his hands on Tycho's complete, unadulterated data, particularly the long, meticulous record of the orbit of Mars. And it was in this treasure trove of numbers, this legacy of a lifetime of obsessive observation, that Kepler found the truth. The data showed, with unarguable clarity, that the planets did not move in perfect circles, as everyone from Aristotle to Copernicus had believed. They moved in ellipses. It was the discovery that would lead directly to his three laws of planetary motion, the laws that would in turn become the foundation for Isaac Newton's law of universal gravitation. The entire edifice of modern physics rests on the foundation of Kepler's laws, and Kepler's laws rest on the foundation of Tycho Brahe's data. Without this strange, flamboyant, metal-nosed nobleman and his drunken moose, without his fanatical, 20-year-long obsession with precision, the scientific revolution might have stalled for another century. Tycho Brahe is the ultimate proof that in science, as in life, it takes all kinds. It takes the quiet mystics, and it takes the loud, proud, party-loving kings. He was the man who built the bridge to the modern cosmos, and he built it out of brass, gold, and pure, unapologetic style. And so we arrive at the summit. At number 1 on our list of history's most bizarre geniuses is a man so far ahead of his time that even now we are still struggling to catch up. He was a man who dreamed in lightning, a man who spoke the language of alternating currents, a man who wanted to give the entire world free, limitless energy. His name is Nikola Tesla, and he was without a doubt the patron saint of strange and beautiful minds. He was a poet of electricity, a visionary who saw the future with a clarity that was both a gift and a curse. But his towering intellect was housed in a personality so eccentric, so riddled with phobias and compulsions, that he spent the last years of his life in a lonely hotel room. shunned by the very world he had helped to create. His only true companion, a white pigeon that he loved with all the passion of a man in love with a woman. His story is the ultimate testament to the fine, shimmering line between genius and madness. To understand the strangeness of Nikola Tesla, we have to look beyond the lightning bolts and the Tesla coils that have made him a cult icon. We have to look at the man himself, a tall, gaunt figure in a perfectly tailored suit, a man whose mind was a pristine, beautiful, and terrifyingly fragile palace. He was a man who lived a life of almost monastic discipline, yet whose inner world was a raging storm of visions, compulsions, and bizarre, unshakable beliefs. He was born in 1856, during a fierce lightning storm in a remote village in what is now Croatia. The midwife, seeing the storm as a bad omen, declared, "He will be a child of darkness." His mother, a brilliant woman who invented her own household appliances, replied, "No, he will be a child of light." It was a prophecy that would define his entire existence. From a very early age, it was clear that Tesla's mind was a different kind of instrument. He was plagued by intense, vivid flashes of light, which were often accompanied by powerful, hallucinatory visions. These weren't just daydreams, they were fully formed, three-dimensional realities that would unfold before his eyes, often against his will. He could see entire inventions, complete with all their moving parts, and he could run them in his mind for weeks, testing them for flaws, making adjustments, all without ever drawing a sketch or building a prototype. His mind was the ultimate virtual reality simulator. This ability, which he called his mental laboratory, was the source of his genius. But it also made him a stranger in the world of ordinary perception. He lived with one foot in our reality and one foot in the shimmering electric landscape of his own mind. This internal sensitivity was mirrored by an extreme sensitivity to the external world. He was acutely aware of sensory stimuli, the ticking of a watch, the landing of a fly on a table, the rumble of a distant train. These were not background noises for him. They were deafening, physical assaults. He had a pathological aversion to round objects, especially pearls. The sight of a pearl earring on a woman could send him into a state of near revulsion. He was also deeply repulsed by human hair and couldn't bear to touch it. And then there was his obsession with the number 3. It was a compulsion that governed every aspect of his life. He would walk around a block 3 times before entering a building. He would wash his hands in sets of 3. He would use 18 napkins, a multiple of 3, to polish his silverware to a gleaming, sterile perfection before every meal. He would calculate the cubic volume of his food before he would eat it. He would stay in hotel rooms whose number was divisible by 3. It was a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder of staggering intensity. But for Tesla, it was not an illness. It was a cosmic necessity. He believed that the number 3 was a fundamental key to the universe, a divine signature woven into the fabric of reality. His compulsions were not random. They were his way of aligning himself with the hidden numerical harmony of the cosmos. He channeled this intense, obsessive energy into his work. After emigrating to America, he briefly worked for Thomas Edison, but the two men were like matter and antimatter. Edison was a pragmatist, a tinkerer, a man who famously said that genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Tesla was a visionary, a poet, a man for whom the inspiration was everything. Their conflict came to a head over the future of electricity. Edison was a champion of direct current DC, a system that was inefficient and required a power plant on every other city block. Tesla had a better idea, a vision that had come to him in a flash of insight while walking through a park alternating current AC. AC was an elegant, efficient system that could transmit power over vast distances with minimal loss. it was the future. Their disagreement escalated into the infamous War of the Currents. Edison, fearing that AC would destroy his DC empire, launched a vicious smear campaign. He publicly electrocuted stray dogs, cats, and even an elephant with AC to prove how dangerous it was. Tesla, in response, became a showman. To demonstrate the safety of his system, he would stage spectacular public demonstrations where he would pass hundreds of thousands of volts of alternating current through his own body, his tall, thin frame illuminated by a crackling, ethereal aura, a tube of glowing gas held aloft in his hand. He would stand on a stage, a human conduit for man-made lightning, a modern Prometheus who had not just stolen fire from the gods, but had tamed it, domesticated it, and was now offering it to the world. Tesla won the war. His AC system, backed by George Westinghouse, was chosen to power the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, the White City, which became a dazzling, incandescent testament to the power and beauty of his vision. He would go on to design the hydroelectric power plant at Niagara Falls, the first of its kind, which harnessed the raw power of nature and turned it into clean, abundant energy for thousands. He was at the peak of his fame, a scientific celebrity who was feted by society and celebrated as the man who had electrified the world. He had given us the modern age, but his mind was already moving on to ideas so radical, so far beyond the horizon of his time, that they would ultimately lead to his downfall. He wasn't content to just power the world. He wanted to set it free. And this is where the story turns from a triumph into a tragedy, a tale of a brilliant mind whose dreams were simply too big for the world he lived in. With the victory of alternating current, Nikola Tesla had achieved a level of success and fame that few inventors ever know. He had proven his vision, vanquished his rivals, and laid the electrical grid for the entire 20th century. But for a mind like Tesla's, the present was never enough. His gaze was always fixed on the distant, shimmering horizon of the possible, and what he saw there was a future that was not just powered, but connected. A world where energy and information would flow freely through the very air we breathe, available to anyone, anywhere, for free. It was a vision of breathtaking beauty and staggering ambition. It was also the dream that would destroy him. His grand obsession became the idea of wireless transmission. He wasn't just thinking about sending messages, like Marconi, who he believed had stolen his patents for the radio. Tesla was thinking bigger. He wanted to transmit power, wirelessly, across the globe. He envisioned a world without power lines, where ships at sea, planes in the air, and even the humblest of homes, in the most remote corners of the earth, could simply draw electricity from the atmosphere itself. He believed that the earth and its ionosphere could be turned into a giant resonance circuit, a global electrical machine that would thrum with limitless clean energy. To prove this, he built a mysterious laboratory in Colorado Springs. Here, in the high, thin air of the Rocky Mountains, he constructed his masterpiece, the magnifying transmitter, a colossal Tesla coil that was the largest and most powerful in the world. From a towering mast, it would erupt in a volcanic display of man-made lightning, shooting bolts over 100 feet long into the night sky. The sound was deafening, a continuous rolling thunder that could be heard for miles. The entire ground around the laboratory would glow with an eerie electrical corona. Butterflies would be swept up in the electrical winds, their wings glowing with St. Elmo's fire. He had turned the Colorado desert into his own private thunderstorm. During one experiment, he drew so much power that he caused a massive blackout, plunging the entire city of Colorado Springs into darkness. He had become a true god of lightning. Convinced he was on the verge of a breakthrough, he returned to New York and secured funding from the powerful banker J.P. Morgan to build his magnum opus, a giant transmission tower on Long Island called Wardenclyffe. It was to be the first node in his world wireless system, a global network for broadcasting power and information. The tower was a magnificent alien-looking structure, a 187-foot-tall mushroom of steel and copper. But Morgan's vision was far more limited than Tesla's. He thought he was funding a transatlantic radio tower, a new and improved telegraph. When he realized that Tesla intended to give the power away for free, he was horrified. Free energy was not a sound business model. He pulled the funding. The dream died. Wardenclyffe was never completed. It stood for years as a silent, rusting monument to a future that never was, before it was eventually dynamited and sold for scrap during World War I. The failure of Wardenclyffe broke Tesla. He spiraled into a deep depression and began to retreat from the world. His patents expired, his money ran out, and he was slowly eclipsed by lesser but more practical. He spent the last 4 decades of his life as a recluse, living in a series of New York hotels, his mind still buzzing with incredible unbuilt inventions: particle beam weapons, vertical takeoff aircraft, geothermal power plants. He was a man living in the future, trapped in the present. It was during these lonely, later years that his eccentricities, once the quirks of a celebrated genius, hardened into the defining features of a tragic hermit. And it was here that he found his final and most unusual source of solace: the pigeons of New York City. He would spend hours every day in Bryant Park, feeding the flocks, tending to any that were sick or injured. He would even bring them back to his hotel room, to the horror of the management. But there was one pigeon, a beautiful white female, that was special. He loved this pigeon. He claimed he loved her as a man loves a woman, and that she loved him in return. He said that she was his muse, his confidant, the one being in the world who truly understood him. He claimed that one night, the white pigeon flew into his hotel room, and as she died in his arms, a brilliant, blinding light shot from her eyes, a light more intense than any he had ever produced in his laboratories. In that moment, he said, he knew that his life's work was finished. Nikola Tesla died alone in his hotel room in 1943 at the age of 86. He died in poverty, a man who had generated fortunes for others, but had kept almost nothing for himself. He was a man who had dreamed of a world of abundance and connection, but who had ended his days in solitude and obscurity. His legacy is a strange and beautiful paradox. The world he envisioned, a world of wireless communication, remote control, and global connectivity, is the world we are now living in. He was not a madman. He was simply a man who was born a century too early. His life is a poignant and ultimately inspiring testament to the power of a single brilliant and deeply strange mind to see over the horizon. He was the child of light, and the world he illuminated is the one we all now call home. And so, our journey through the strange and wonderful landscapes of the human mind comes to a close. We've met the geniuses who rode backwards, the ones who talked to gods, the nomads who had no home, and the hermits who weighed the world. We've seen the minds that painted nightmares, and the ones that partied with drunken moose. And we've ended with the man who fell in love with a pigeon and dreamed of giving us the stars. They are a strange and beautiful collection of souls. These mavericks, these misfits, these brilliant, broken, and utterly human beings. They remind us that the path to discovery is not always a straight and logical line. Sometimes it is a winding, chaotic, and deeply personal journey. They teach us that the most profound insights often come not from a place of order, but from a place of obsession, of compulsion, of a mind that is simply not content with the world as it is. The next time you see someone, who doesn't quite fit in, someone whose habits are a little strange, whose ideas are a little too wild. Maybe, just maybe, you'll see them a little differently. Perhaps their strangeness is not a flaw, but a feature. Perhaps it is the very engine of a mind that is seeing the world in a way that we are not yet ready to understand. For in those beautiful, bizarre minds, in those lonely hotel rooms and chaotic laboratories, the future is quietly being born. And now, as the stories fade and the silence returns, perhaps it's time to let your own mind drift into the quiet, mysterious, and wonderful landscape of your own dreams. Sleep well.